right. There we go. All right. So, let me introduce myself first. My name is Matthijs Visser. I work for a company called Advanis. We do custom quantitative research, full service, and try to leverage tech in a way to collect better data, provide more actionable reporting. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about how we approach collecting data from mobile users. Now, we all know the difference between this one and this one is more than just my ability to use this one right now. Well, this one is useless at the moment. When plugged in, this device has one application. That is, I can talk on it. That's it. Whereas this one seems to have more applications every day. Put that down. There. So that has led to some interesting discussions, both internally for us at Advanis as well as with our clients as to what's the best way to try and contact folks on their mobile device. So some folks said, let's use SMS, because everybody uses SMS these days, right? Others said, well, no, let's use mobile web, because then respondents can click on the responses as opposed to having to type them out. And then we don't have to deal with the 160 character limit. Others said, let's use IVR, so whereby the question text and the responses are read to respondents by an automated recording, and respondents use a keypad to provide responses. Because what we found is that, especially those who don't own a smartphone, are less inclined to answer surveys via mobile web or SMS. Plus, response rates among older demographics for mobile web and SMS was lower. So proponents of IVR would argue, let's use IVR, because then regardless of device type, regardless of age, everyone can do the survey. Really what it comes down to, as shown on the slide here, is that because of the vast array of devices and applications on those devices, people have developed a vast array of communication preferences. The way I like to use my mobile device is different from the way you use your mobile device. Personally, I'll confess to not being a huge fan of texting, dare I say. So personally, I'd be much more inclined to do the survey via mobile web than via SMS. So then, how do we contact customers and give them the opportunity to give us feedback using a method they're most comfortable with? The approach we came up with is giving them a choice. Give them the choice of how to provide their feedback instead of dictating one methodology. We tried out this approach last year, so I'll talk a little bit about the pilot we conducted, the results, and then talk a little bit about some other considerations to keep in mind when trying to apply that approach. So let's have a look at the approach first. We'll call it the choice approach. So on day one, we sent folks initial SMS invites that gave them two options, online or SMS. And then the online option was device agnostic, so when people did it on their mobile, it would automatically show them the mobile version of the survey, and if they accessed it on a desktop browser, it would adjust automatically as well. On day two, we follow up with folks via IVR if we hadn't heard from them on day one. And then lastly, we do a final reminder on day three via email with a link to the web survey. And again, just for those who we hadn't been able to get a hold of via IVR. One thing I should mention here, one learning, initially on day one, that initial SMS invite also included the option to call into the IVR. And what we found is that actually that decreased our response rate compared to just offering the online and SMS options. So it seems as if offering too many choices all at once leads to information overload and then reduces response rate. So we took the IVR out on day one and instead just provided that option as a follow-up on day two. So to pilot the approach, we compared it to two other approaches, those being an Ivr Only Approach and an SMS-only approach. Some other approaches we had tried previously were SMS to web, just SMS to web, and email to web. Those both gave much lower response rate than the Ivr Only and SMS-only approaches, so weren't included in the pilot. These three were sort of considered our three viable options to use on the particular study that we were doing this pilot for. We randomly assigned respondents to one of these three approaches. Got about 70,000 surveys in total across the three, so we're working with a fairly decent sample size here. All right, so the first big question on our minds was, are people actually going to use these different methods? Or are they all going to gravitate towards one method? In particular, we're curious if the SMS responses would dominate the surveys we would get, because everybody uses SMS, right? Well, as it turns out, we didn't see one method dominate. SMS was used most frequently, or was chosen most frequently, which is not surprising considering it's the initial invite method we used, but it's followed closely by IVR, and then 1 in 5 respondents chose to do the survey online. So that then made us wonder, what's driving people's choice of response method? And the main driver, and we've seen it before, is age. But this is staggering. Looking from sort of left to right on the chart, and on the left, in the 13 to 17-year-old category, 78% chose SMS. Only 16% chose IVR, and 6% chose web. And then that SMS, the incidence of SMS declines sharply as we go towards the right of the chart, with only 14% of those 65 years old or older choosing SMS, and they gravitate much more heavily towards IVR, which is the gray bar here. And then web kind of goes up with age, peaks at the 45 to 64-year-old category, and then trails off again. So thought this was, this was a big insight for us in terms of, you kind of know that age impacts this, but looking at the degree to which was quite a surprise. So the next question is, well, but does that actually lead to higher response rates? And in fact, it does. Looking at the three approaches here, the choice approach gave us a 32% higher response rate compared to the Ivr Only approach, and a 54% higher response rate compared to the SMS Only approach. So the numbers here, the 20%, the 24%, and the 31%, they reflect the number of completed surveys we collected divided by the total number of people we invited for each of the approaches. So nearly 1 out of every 3 people we invited to do the study via the choice approach completed the survey. Then the next question, or the last question we wanted answered was around representativeness. By drawing more people, by having more people complete the survey, are we at the very least making sure that we are as representative as the other approaches, if not hopefully better? First characteristic we looked at was smartphone ownership. What we'd seen in previous research is that the SMS-only approach tends to be somewhat skewed towards those who own a smartphone, which is not surprising considering it's much easier to do an SMS survey on a smartphone than it is on a feature phone. So our pilots confirmed those earlier findings and then showed that the smartphone incidence for the choice approach somewhat sat in between the IVR only and SMS only approaches. Very similar story in terms of age. Again, previous research had shown that the SMS only approach is skewed towards younger demographics. Pilot confirmed those findings and showed that the choice approach, somewhat the incidence of the different age categories for the choice approach falls somewhat in between that SMS only and IVR only approaches. Lastly, transaction type. Oh, and by the way, I should mention that for a smartphone instance and age, we would love to have had population characteristics. Unfortunately, those characteristics weren't available in our client's database, so all we had to go off was comparing the 3 approaches side by side. For transaction type, though, we had the population distribution available to us. And it was nice to see there that the choice approach came as the closest towards that transaction type distribution in the population among the 3 approaches we tested. So then, to summarize the findings of the pilot, the preferred response methods do indeed vary considerably from respondents to respondents, and they appreciate the fact that we are giving them different options. That then results in high response rates. And lastly, it ensures that results are representative of the overall population or customer base. So, few things to take into consideration then when trying to apply this approach. First one is to determine suitable contact methods for your particular study. In our case, we used SMS, IVR, and email. That's because we had access to respondents' mobile phone numbers and their email addresses. And these methods made sense for this particular population on this particular study. Now, depending on the type of respondents that you're trying to interview in your particular study, the type of questions you want to ask, the contact information you have available, you may choose a different mix of contact methods. Others you may want to consider are, as was just mentioned, in-app surveys, or an app that pops up an invite that then goes to mobile web. Or you may even want to do live interviews for really hard to reach populations or high value customers. Whatever the situation, you can come up with the number of permutations is endless. The second, that then leads to the second point, is to actually kind of go through that exercise and try to figure out, okay, here's the contact methods I want to use. You may come to realize that for some of those contact methods, you don't have all the contact information available to do so. So that goes then to the second point, which is collect as much contact information as you possibly can from your potential respondents. If as an organization you are wanting to potentially survey your customers, ask them for as much contact information as they're willing to give you when you first interact with them. And even for existing customers. The next time you talk with them, try and gather as much information as you can to try and fill those gaps in your customer contact database to get a full picture of how to contact each of your customers. Third point here is very important because it ensures that you stay friends with the FCC. It is illegal to contact customers, or anyone for that matter, via SMS or IVR, or under certain circumstances you can do live interviews, unless you have explicit permission from the person being contacted. So as you collect your contact information, also ask for explicit permission from folks to contact them via IVR, SMS, and whatever methods you are planning on leveraging. And lastly, I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but obviously it's crucial to optimize web service for mobile. Now, the thing is, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I have seen too many surveys still that don't follow some of the best practices we've been discussing here, like keeping your survey short. Just going to say it again, like not having grid questions. And it's easy to address that grid question challenge. You simply split up the grid into single response questions. It's not rocket science. Avoiding the use of radio buttons. Those are a leftover from desktop and not particularly suitable to my fat fingers on mobile. So like any other app out there, just allow respondents to click on the entire response row. And then auto advance as respondents click on questions, just to reduce the total number of clicks required to do the survey. So quick screenshot here. Like we've invested quite a bit of time and effort over the last few years in developing our mobile survey platform. So it reflects some of these these best practices and learnings. If you're wanting to see it in action, just come see me during the break, and I'll be able to send you a link to a demo survey. And then again, just to show some stats of the importance, like you can see the number of people accessing our web surveys via mobile. We can see it increase, not just on an annual basis, we can see it on a monthly basis. These are some stats from one of our other customer experience trackers, which is an email to web survey. A year ago, 19% of respondents completed the survey via mobile. Last April, that number had increased to 27%. And again, that survey isn't trying to be mobile. It's a simple email invite to a web survey. And so again, it just shows that even when we as market researchers don't think we are doing mobile research, we probably are. And so it again highlights the importance of giving respondents the option to complete the survey that they're most comfortable with, and then making sure that those options are optimized for mobile devices. And with that, I'll open the floor for any questions.
Nothing better than a presenter who follows the time and actually even brings up the question slide, so I don't have to do anything except stand here and look good, at least in my own mind. Any questions before I start asking them? Oh, damn, somebody always asks one.
The information that you showed about the increase in those going to mobile in the surveys, do you have any sense of how that breaks out in terms of smartphone versus tablet?
That's a good question. I hadn't looked at it. But, so no, I don't have a sense for that. But it'd be really interesting to look.
Another question in the back. Otherwise, I have a question or a request. I like your comment about the radio buttons and the fat fingers. we can compare fingers later on. But I like the auto advance idea, but please also give an opportunity to have a go back button.
Absolutely, absolutely. And obviously the auto advance only works for single response questions. However, or single response questions. Single response questions, though, generally make up, at least on my surveys, the vast majority of the questions.
Right.
So when that's the case, auto advance. For multiple response, ranking, just have that next button there as usual.
But even if you're riding in a car and you hit a bump and you hit like your service sucks instead of great, you know,
yeah, absolutely.
So at least have the opportunity to go back.
Absolutely.
And do you have, another question is, do you see any variation in the data or in the types of responses you're getting and in the types of satisfaction people are getting as the form factors are changing of the devices that they're responding on?
So I anticipated that one. I was curious if I was going to run out of time, and so here's the scores by response method. So you can see. So on the left is the scores for each of the three approaches. You can see SMS only is the top box score is somewhat higher, but part of that too is because we can't ask the exact same question worded exactly the same on SMS as via IVR and online because of that character limit. So that definitely plays into that higher top box score for SMS only. We see it too when we look at just the choice approach or the results from the choice approach broken out by method. Again, we see a higher top box score for SMS. And then a lower top box score for IVR, which the exciting part of that for me is that we seem to draw in some more respondents that initially weren't part of our sampling frame by giving them these different options and making sure that we capture as much feedback as we possibly can.
Wonderful. Any other questions from the audience? Otherwise, a big round of applause for Matthijs.